Why Edward Snowden Left America. Many of you have probably heard of Edward Snowden. You probably have to be sleeping under a rock if you've never heard of him. He is a person that ignites great controversy in the minds of many people. In the minds of those in military intelligence, the name Edward Snowden is associated with Benedict Arnold, a traitor, things of this sort. Donald Trump one time responded on Edward Snowden. He said, "Treason is still punishable by execution." Even people in the Democratic Party were not happy with Edward Snowden. In fact, many of them wanted him to hang. And many of them still have Edward Snowden under some form of man-trap or investigation to try to literally bring him out from Russia and bring him up on charges in the United States. Among the common public, Edward Snowden is respected or hated. Doesn't seem to be much of a middle ground with him. He either inspires great appreciation and bravery, or he inspires utter disgust from a lot of people. However you feel about Edward Snowden, this video is not to convince you of rather if he's a great guy or a bad guy, rather if he's a traitor or not a traitor, rather if he is this or that. I leave that for you to decide. This video is about revealing what Edward Snowden actually revealed and what made him such a hated figure among so many politicians and people within the military brass. Let's start with what Edward Snowden had to say. You see, Edward Snowden worked in a certain military department, which was basically the Department of Surveillance and Communication. He was basically told that they would basically have to spy on America's enemies and have to protect America through the information network that they would accumulate. He was part of the project where they would basically give information to what is called the super brain, which is a massive computer that holds all the records of everyone's phone conversations and things of this sort. For a while, Edward Snowden did this job, but let's talk about what he had to say about it. Edward Snowden stated that the surveillance department and the military intelligence that he was working with worked within the communities of American cities. With these communities, they ended up having slush funds where they funded certain projects and operations that would entail, well, to make it very simple and not complex, putting cameras in people's rooms and spying on American citizens and violating their rights. This operation would entail certain persons would be singled out from certain families and then they would be spied upon. The military intelligence also wanted to test their EEG and EMF frequency devices. They wanted to see how it would affect the brain and affect the mind. So certain persons were singled out. These persons could have been anyone you know. Could have been your brother, could have been your sister, could have been your mom, could have been your dad, your uncles, your nieces, whoever they were. The way it would work is the subject would witness everyone turn against them for really unreasonable ways, judgmental and hypocritical understanding. But you see, what is going on with the subject is that the subject doesn't know that a plot has happened against that subject, an entrapment, if you will. And if you're thinking of gang stalking and things like that, this all just goes with it. So I don't want you to so much think of gang stalking. What I want you to think of what Edward described. Edward basically stated that the U.S. government made laws through the Patriot Act and justified this law through the 9/11 attack, which had so much evidence of an inside job that it's absolutely mind-blowing that we're not calling it an inside job, and that nobody within military intelligence was even arrested for producing this operation. The criminals were allowed to go free. These same criminals created Homeland Security. These same criminals enforced military departments and even police forces to work within the Patriot Act system. The Patriot Act system would then produce families who would volunteer themselves to hand over other family members, either born in their house or people that they simply knew or were in charge of, to be subjected to EMF pulses, EEG technology, surveillance, and psychological damage and psychological attacks. They would basically tell these targets that they were crazy, that they were hearing voices, that it's all their fault. They would subject them to the worst type of behavior in order to induce the most destructive results in their life. What this entails is that a human being is taken like a lab rat, put inside a cage. And the person's monitoring the cage is his own loved ones, members of his own culture, members of his own people. And as the rat looks up at the cage, he's wondering why no one cares about him. And according to Edward Snowden, the reason why is because the families that get recruited have already been poisoned against that person. They have accepted money, they have accepted terms of condition, or they were blackmailed and extorted for past prior sins or anything they were caught doing. In order to cover up their sins or crimes, or to accept money or real estate or whatever it was offered, they would offer up one of their own. Of course, the test subject would have no idea about this information because this information is considered controversial. At one point it's legal, but at another point it's not. At one point it can be enacted, but it can also be overthrown in court. Therefore, what we have is a divisional line with it. An operation that on paper is legal, but within court can be thrown out due to illegal procedures that would lead to the enactment of this particular junction of the Patriot Act. What does that mean? That means that these victims will never see justice. They'll probably have their whole families or whole history wiped away just to cover up the crimes of others who have to make sure that everything is in legal print before they can really come out and admit this. Now, with that being stated, this is what Edward Snowden testified about. This is what he testified before his peers, before the media. You can read his book. You can check this out. This is what he actually stated. This activity was something that Edward Snowden was very much involved in. You see, Edward Snowden was the guy who had to give the frequency numbers to these families in order to mess with these individuals. He actually had to give the technology and teach these families through his agents how to install these devices into their rooms and how to induce psychological behavior among people. Edward Snowden did this for years. And as he watched America eat their own, and as he watched family members get a kick, get an absolute thrill out of hurting other people, it started to disgust him. It started to make him sick. He didn't see the end result to these experiments. He did not see when these experiments would stop, what they will culminate to, or how they can even be explained. He saw no reparations to those victims, no restitution to those victims, not an apology, not an acknowledgement, not anything. So what he saw were innocent victims, victims being judged and condemned for the premises of an experiment, for the premises of money. But of course, in the military, they basically call it the ends justify the means. But Edward Snowden saw no means. Neither did the victims, and neither did those who take part in hurting them. So what happens in the end result? Now we're in a country that talks about civil war. We're in a country that is very much armed and ready to do some horrible things. Now many people, if they had to shoot these family members for doing things like that to them, though their actions would be illegal, it would also be justified. You see, when you violate other people's privacy, other people's, sense of being, when you violate their mind, when you violate their will, when you violate what is inherited to them through the auspiciousness of God and the acts of providence, and when you violate your own providence, and when you use your military defenses and technology against your own people, what you cause is divide and conquer. Not the conquering of what you call the weak, the conquering of yourself. What happens to people who survive those type of things, who realize those type of things, who understand the parameters of what has been done to them? Well, soul searching would have to occur, probably for the few, but for the many, it won't be soul searching. For the many, it would be preparation. It would be the readiment and the rudiments of what they're been given. And what they've been given is a sense of self-defense, self-preservation, and to annihilate every enemy that even wants to invade their mind again.